The day Caleb Rivers saw her swing that axe, he knew two things. 1. She had no business building a cabin alone. And 2. He had no business watching her do it. But there he was, hidden in the pines on the ridge above her land, watching a slip of a woman wrestle logs that outweighed her by 100 pounds. For 3 days he'd done this. 3 days he'd told himself he was just checking the fence line, and 3 days he'd ended up frozen in place, a fool who couldn't look away. She was all wrong for this country. Her hands were too soft, her frame too slight. Her technique was a disaster. The way she notched those logs would have his old mentor spinning in his grave. But damn if she wasn't determined. Every time a log slipped, every time the axe glanced off wrong, she just set her jaw and went right back at it. The stubborn tilt of her chin made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt in 2 years. 2 years since Elizabeth. 2 years since he buried his wife and their stillborn son in the little cemetery behind the church. 2 years since he promised himself he was done feeling anything but work and whiskey. He'd built walls around his heart higher and stronger than any cabin, and he'd been content to live inside them. Alone was easier. Alone didn't hurt. But this woman, with her impossible dream and her backwards axe work, was making those walls feel flimsy. He didn't even know her name. He didn't want to know it. Knowing her name would make it real, and real meant risk. And risk meant that soul-crushing pain all over again. No. Better to just watch, make sure she didn't kill herself, and then ride away. That was the lie he told himself every morning. Caleb shifted in the saddle. Down below, the woman paused, wiping sweat from her brow. She was studying a log, and even from this distance he could see the problem. She'd cut the notch too deep on one side. The next log wouldn't sit level. She'd have to start over. Waste half a day's work. His fingers itched to ride down there, to show her the right way. But he stayed put. She hadn't asked for help. She didn't even know he existed. Then he heard it. A crack that echoed across the valley like a gunshot. A sound that was all wrong. Caleb's blood went cold. He watched in horrible slow motion as the log she was positioning gave way. The supporting beam beneath it splintered. The whole thing was coming down, and she was right underneath it. Her cry of pain cut through him like a blade. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. His horse was already moving, crashing down the slope through brush and over rocks. He hit the ground running and saw her on her knees, her right hand pinned beneath the fallen log, her face white with shock. "Don't move," he barked, dropping beside her. He got his hands under the log, lifted with his legs, and heaved it aside. She gasped, cradling her hand to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Let me see," Caleb said, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked up at him, and he saw the fear flicker across her face. A strange man appearing out of nowhere. He forced himself to gentle his tone. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to see your hand." She hesitated, then slowly extended her arm. Her hand was already swelling, the knuckles scraped raw and bleeding. He examined it with careful fingers. She hissed when he touched her middle finger, but nothing felt broken. Badly bruised, but she'd been lucky. "How long have you been watching me?" Her voice was quiet, but steady. Not an accusation. A fact. She'd known. "You're going to kill yourself if you keep on like this," he said, letting go of her hand. He sat back on his heels, suddenly aware of how close they were, how blue her eyes were, how she smelled of pine sap and sheer determination. "I'm managing fine." Her chin came up with that stubborn tilt he'd been watching for 3 days. "You're managing to build a death trap." "It's my death trap, my land." She struggled to her feet, cradling her injured hand. He rose with her. She had to look up to meet his eyes, and something passed between them. A recognition. The kind that has nothing to do with names, and everything to do with seeing someone else who was carrying the same kind of weight. "Hannah Sullivan," she said finally. "Since you've apparently been spying on me, you might as well know my name. Caleb Rivers. I've got a ranch over the ridge. And I wasn't spying. I was..." He trailed off. What had he been doing? making sure you were all right. Well, I'm fine. She wasn't. Her hand was shaking, and blood was soaking her sleeve. But he recognized that pride. He'd worn it himself for 2 years straight. The kind of pride that was really just fear dressed up in stubbornness. That's when he saw it. The slight tan line on her left ring finger. The same mark he carried on his own hand. She saw him looking and curled her fingers inward, hiding it. They stood there in the wreckage, two people who'd lost everything, pretending they needed nothing. "You should wrap that hand," he said finally. "Infection out here will kill you faster than a falling log. I know how to take care of myself. I'm sure you do." He picked up his hat. But knowing how and being able to are two different things when you're alone. Something flickered in her eyes at that word. Alone. She understood it the same way he did. Not just a state of being, a choice, a sentence, a wall. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Rivers," she said, her voice formal now, distant, building her own walls right there in front of him. "But I've managed this far, and I'll manage the rest." He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that managing wasn't the same as living, that building this cabin alone wouldn't bring back whoever she'd lost. But some lessons can't be told. They have to be lived. "Ma'am," he said, settling his hat on his head. He turned toward his horse, then paused. "Your notches are too deep. That's why the logs won't sit level. Take off 1/2 inch, and they'll lock proper." He didn't wait for her to answer. He just swung into his saddle and rode back up the ridge. But he couldn't help but look back once. She was standing there, one hand cradled against her chest, watching him go. Still determined. Still alone. He'd check on her tomorrow, he told himself, just to make sure she hadn't killed herself. That's what neighbors did. Nothing more. But as he rode away, he knew he was lying. He'd been lying to himself for 3 days now. She was building something out here in the wilderness. Something more than just a cabin. And against every promise he'd made to his dead wife, against every wall he'd built around his heart, Caleb Rivers found himself wanting to help her build it. Caleb couldn't stop thinking about her. Hannah Sullivan. Her stubborn pride. Her bruised hand. That night, lying in his bed, staring at the ceiling beams he and Elizabeth had picked out together, he made a decision. He rose before dawn, saddled his horse in the dark, and rode to the stand of lodgepole pine on the north corner of his property. He spent the morning cutting and notching, his hands remembering the work, his mind wandering to blue eyes and tan lines where wedding rings used to be. By noon, he had 12 perfect logs. He loaded them onto his wagon and waited for sunset. The ride to her property felt like sneaking around, which, he supposed, he was. He unloaded the logs near her building site, stacking them where she'd find them first thing. He didn't leave a note. She'd know. Then he rode home through the dark, feeling like a fool and not caring one bit. Hannah woke to birdsong and crawled out of her tent. She stopped dead. There, stacked neat as you please, were logs. Perfect logs, notched with a precision that was almost supernatural. She walked around them slowly, running her good hand over the smooth wood. Something cracked open in her chest. She knew who'd left them. Caleb Rivers. His rough voice, and his careful hands and his eyes that understood far too much. Part of her was angry. She'd come here to do this herself, to prove she could, to build a dream that William never got to see. William. God, it still hurt to think his name. 3 months since the factory accident. 3 months since the foreman came to their apartment, hat in his hands, eyes on the floor. 3 months since her world ended, and she decided to build a new one out here in the wilderness, one log at a time. This was supposed to be his dream. If he couldn't build it, she would. Every log was a prayer. Every wall, a promise. But she looked at the logs again. Pride was one thing. A roof over her head before the first snow was another. Caleb Rivers had helped quietly, without demanding thanks, without making her feel small. He helped the way someone does when they understand what it means to keep going, when all you want to do is stop. That evening, she baked biscuits and made a pot of stew. She left it covered near where the logs had appeared. No note. He hadn't left one for her. The next morning, the pot was gone. Washed clean and set back in its place. And there were more logs. And beside them, a small bundle of clean cloth for bandages and a tin of salve. She held the tin in her hand, and tears stung her eyes. When was the last time someone had taken care of her? A silent pattern began. She'd wake to find materials she needed. Logs, yes, but also nails, a better saw, leather gloves that actually fit, a hammer with good weight, gifts from a cabin-building ghost, and every evening she'd leave food, biscuits and stew, cornbread and roasted venison, apple pie from wild apples she found near the creek. They never spoke. They never crossed paths in the daylight. But she knew he was watching sometimes. She could feel his eyes on her from the ridge, making sure she was safe. And sometimes she'd find herself showing off a little. See? I'm learning. I'm getting stronger. Watch me build this thing. The cabin took shape. Walls rose, solid and true. The roof frame went up, pointing to the sky like a prayer. She'd stand back at the end of each day, exhausted and filthy and more alive than she'd felt since William died, and marvel at what they were building. In town, people talked. The shopkeeper's wife whispered, "Heard you got yourself a ghost helper out there." Hannah just smiled and said nothing. This silent dance she and Caleb were doing, it was theirs alone. She started leaving notes with the food. Just a simple "thank you" on a scrap of paper. The next day, he responded on the back of the same paper. "You're welcome." A few days later she wrote, "Why are you helping me?" His answer came with the next load of supplies. "Because someone should." The notes got longer. She told him about William and the factory. He told her about Elizabeth and the baby. They were writing letters to each other in the quiet dark, sharing things they could never have said, face to face. It was safer this way. "Do you think they'd be angry?" she wrote one evening. "That we're still here, still trying to build things when they're not?" His response came the next morning. "I think they'd be angry if we stopped." October arrived with cold mornings and golden leaves. The first snow was coming. "You've got another month at most," the shopkeeper warned. "Then winter hits these mountains like a hammer." Hannah worked faster. The cabin was so close. Just the chimney left. The hardest part. The part she had no idea how to build. She found stones for it already stacked near the site. Good, flat stones. And a note. "For the fireplace. Be careful. Storm coming soon." She looked up at the clouds gathering dark and heavy on the peaks, and felt the first touch of real fear. A mountain storm. She'd heard stories in town. People freezing to death. Cabins buried under 10 feet of snow. A white hell. That evening, she wrote back, "I'll hurry." His response came at dawn, with more stones and a bag of mortar. "Don't hurry. Do it right. I'm watching." The words should have been threatening. They weren't. They were a promise. A hand reaching out in the dark. "I won't let you face this alone." She worked on the chimney all day. When she looked up at sunset, she could have sworn she saw him on the ridge. A shadow of a man on a horse. A guardian angel with a weathered face and capable hands. The temperature dropped that night. Hard and fast. Hannah huddled in her tent, listening to the wind howl. It rattled the canvas and carried the smell of snow. She looked at her nearly finished cabin and whispered a prayer. "Just a few more days. Please, just let me finish." But the storm didn't care about her prayers. The blizzard hit with a vengeance that night. By morning, Caleb couldn't see the mountains. The world was a furious, blinding white. He saddled his horse and fought through drifts that came up to his stirrups. When he finally reached her land, her tent was collapsing under the weight of the snow. And Hannah was nowhere to be seen. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs as he spurred his horse through the blinding snow. "Hannah!" His voice was swallowed by the wind. Then he saw her. She was dragging a trunk from the collapsing tent, her face red from the cold, her coat already caked in snow. Relief hit him so hard, it made him dizzy. She was alive. Stubborn and foolish and alive. "You're coming with me. Now." He dismounted. There wasn't time for pleasantries. "I can't leave," she shouted over the wind. "My cabin. All my things. Your cabin has walls but no chimney. You'll freeze to death before morning." He grabbed her trunk and hefted it onto his shoulder. It was heavy, but he wasn't leaving it. "Your tent is about 10 minutes from being completely buried. You have a choice to make, and you have about 30 seconds to make it." She looked at her cabin, the structure she'd poured her soul into, and he saw the moment she broke. "I won't leave it," she said, but her voice wavered. She was scared. "Good." "Your cabin will be here tomorrow," he said, his voice softer now. "You might not be. Now get on the horse." For a long moment, she just stood there, snow gathering on her shoulders. Then she nodded, grabbed a small canvas bag, and let him help her onto his horse. He climbed up behind her, pulling her back against his chest, wrapping his coat around them both. The ride back was brutal. The wind cut like knives. Hannah shivered against him, and he held her tighter. This was the closest he'd been to a woman since Elizabeth died. He could smell her hair, feel the curve of her back against him. Something that felt dangerously like hope shifted in his chest, and he buried it deep. Just survive the ride. That's all that mattered. By the time they reached his ranch, they were both half frozen. He practically pushed her through the door. The house was blessedly warm. Hannah stood dripping on his floor, looking around with wide eyes, and he saw the exact moment she understood where she was. Elizabeth was everywhere. Her paintings on the walls, her embroidery on the pillows, her wedding photograph on the mantel, smiling and beautiful and so alive it hurt to look. Hannah took it all in. This wasn't just a house. This was a shrine, a museum to a dead woman, preserved by a man who couldn't let go. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said finally, his voice rough. "I'll find you something dry." He went to the bedroom he hadn't slept in since Elizabeth died. Her clothes were still in the wardrobe, still smelling faintly of lavender. He pulled out a soft blue cotton dress. His hands shook as he held it. "I'm sorry, Lizzie," he whispered to the empty room. "But she needs it." When he brought the dress out, Hannah was standing by the fire. She looked at the dress, at his face, and something passed between them. A recognition of how hard this was. How strange, and sad, and necessary. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking it from him. He showed her to the spare room, the one that had been meant for the baby, and left her to change. She was in his house, in Elizabeth's dress, snowed in together. He'd brought her here to save her life. Now they had to figure out how to exist in the same space, two broken people carrying the weight of their dead. When he came back inside, she was in the kitchen, wearing the blue dress. It fit her differently than it had Elizabeth. Hannah was taller, leaner, but seeing her in his dead wife's clothes didn't hurt as much as he'd expected. Maybe because she wore it like a borrowed coat, not like she was trying to replace anyone. "I thought I'd make dinner," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "If that's all right." He let her. He sat at his own kitchen table and watched Hannah Sullivan move around his kitchen. And something that had been frozen inside him for 2 years began to thaw. They ate in silence, the storm raging outside. But the weight of everything unsaid was too heavy to ignore. "She was beautiful," Hannah said finally, nodding toward the photograph. "Your wife." "She was." "How long?" 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The precision of it sounded crazy, but Hannah just nodded, like she understood. "She died bringing our son into the world," he continued, the words coming easier than they ever had before. "Neither of them made it. The midwife said, sometimes these things just happen, like that's supposed to make it hurt less." "William died under a machine," Hannah said, her voice steady, her hands gripping her fork too tight. "They said it was quick, like that's supposed to be a comfort." They looked at each other across the table. Two people who'd been told the same useless things. Two people who knew there was no good way to lose someone. "We're both building monuments to ghosts, aren't we?" Caleb said. "Your cabin, my museum here." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Is it working?" "No," he said. The honesty of it surprised him. They're still gone. The cabin won't bring him back. This house full of her things doesn't make her any less dead. We're just pretending that if we finish the right project, it'll all make sense. Then why do we keep doing it? Because stopping feels like giving up. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Hannah set down her fork, covered her face with her hands, and cried. Real gut-wrenching sobs that had been building for months. Caleb stood and moved around the table. He didn't touch her. Just stood close enough so she'd know she wasn't alone. After a while, she looked up, her face red and wet. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to keep living when half of me is buried with him. I don't either, Caleb admitted. But I guess we figure it out. One day at a time, one log at a time, until it gets easier. Does it get easier? He thought about lying, but she deserved the truth. I don't know yet. Ask me again in another 2 years. She laughed, a watery, broken sound. That's the most honest thing anyone's said to me since he died. They finished dinner in a new kind of silence. Lighter somehow. That night, Caleb stood in front of Elizabeth's photograph. Her smile seemed different. Less like an accusation, more like a memory. For the first time since she died, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could start living in the world again. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped together. Caleb woke early and made coffee. Hannah made breakfast. They took turns feeding the fire. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking or playing chess on Elizabeth's old set. He taught her how to play. Elizabeth had been a careful, methodical player. Hannah played like she built cabins, all bold moves and stubborn determination. He found himself charmed by it. There were moments when their hands brushed reaching for the same tool, when their eyes met across the room and held for a heartbeat too long. The air between them crackled with something neither of them was ready to name. On the 3rd night, he couldn't sleep. He found himself standing in front of Elizabeth's photo again. He didn't hear Hannah until she spoke from the hallway, wrapped in a quilt. She was lucky to have someone love her so much. I don't know if lucky is the word. I couldn't save her. That's not love's job, Hannah said, moving closer. Love's job is to show up, to make the time you have matter. William used to say that. She looked at the photograph. And I think he'd tell me the same thing Elizabeth would probably tell you. What's that? That we're allowed to keep living. That honoring the dead doesn't require us to bury ourselves alongside them. Caleb's throat tightened. They stood there in the dim light, 2 broken people trying to figure out how to be whole again. And something passed between them. Not romance, not yet. But the beginning of something that might, if they were brave enough, turn into healing. On the 4th morning, the storm broke. Sunlight poured through the windows, blinding and beautiful. It was time to face reality, time to check on the cabin, time to decide what happened next. And neither of them was ready. They rode out together. The world was silent, buried under feet of pristine white snow. As they crested the ridge, Hannah's cabin came into view. Snow was piled against the north wall, nearly reaching the roof. A tarp was torn loose. One of the shutters hung crooked. But the walls stood. The roof held. The structure she had poured her soul into had survived. Could have been worse, Caleb said, dismounting and assessing the damage. But you'll need to finish that chimney before the next storm. Hannah walked to the cabin door. Inside, everything was frozen. This place that had been her entire world felt empty now, lonely. You could stay, Caleb said from behind her. At the ranch. Winter's coming hard. You'd be warmer there. Safer. She turned to him, saw the offer for what it was. Not pity. Just one lost person offering shelter to another. That's kind of you, it really is. But I have to finish this. For William. For me. Even if it kills you. Even then, she said, managing a small smile. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then I'll help you. Properly this time. No more leaving things in the dark and pretending we're not doing this together. You don't have to. I know. But Elizabeth would haunt me if I let you freeze to death out of pride. He said his wife's name with a lightness she hadn't heard before. And honestly, I could use a project. A man needs a purpose. Something warm bloomed in Hannah's chest, not quite hope, but close. Then I accept. Thank you, Caleb. Don't thank me yet, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. I'm a hard taskmaster. You're going to learn to do this right, even if it kills us both. They shook on it, and then they got to work. The next 2 weeks were the hardest and best of Hannah's life. Caleb was demanding, but patient. He taught her how to read the wood, how to build something that would last. They worked side by side every day, and Hannah felt herself getting stronger. Not just physically, but inside. Like she was rebuilding herself, one careful piece at a time. There were moments when he lifted her to set the ridge beam, his hands steady on her waist, both of them laughing. When she removed a splinter from his palm with such focused tenderness, he forgot to breathe. The near kiss happened on a Tuesday. They were working on a window frame, their faces inches apart. Time seemed to stop. His eyes dropped to her lips. Her breath caught. They swayed toward each other. "Boss, you up here?" Dutch's voice shattered the moment. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Dutch, Caleb's ranch foreman, rode up with supplies. If he noticed the tension, he didn't mention it. But Hannah saw the knowing, amused smile on his weathered face. He knew. By the end of the second week, the cabin was nearly done. Just the chimney remained. It was the last task, the final piece. And they both moved slower, stretching out the time, neither of them wanting to face what came next. On the last day, as the sun set over the finished cabin, Hannah stood in the doorway. The fireplace crackled, warming the walls that would keep her safe. She'd done it. She'd built William's dream. So why did it feel like the loneliest place on earth? Why did the thought of Caleb riding back to his ranch make her chest ache? Caleb stood outside, giving her a moment. He could see her through the window, silhouetted by firelight. The cabin was finished. He should have been proud. Instead, he felt hollow. "Thank you for everything," Hannah said, emerging from the doorway. She was trying to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You would have. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met." He meant it as a compliment, but it came out sounding sad. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat. "If you need anything." "I'll be fine." She wrapped her arms around herself. He nodded and mounted his horse. Every instinct screamed at him to stay, to say something. But what right did he have? She'd built this cabin for her dead husband. He was just a neighbor who'd helped. He rode away slowly, stopping once to look back. She stood on the porch, waving, small and alone against the mountain. He raised a hand in return and turned his horse for home. Each step away felt wrong. Hannah watched until he disappeared. Then she went inside her perfect empty cabin and sat by the fire. The wall she'd built felt like a prison. This was supposed to be the dream. But sitting here alone, she finally understood. It wasn't the cabin she and William had dreamed of. It was the life. The partnership. She had built the wrong thing. She should have been building a life, not a monument. "I built it," she whispered to William's memory. "But it's not enough. It's not home." The next morning, a miserable Caleb rode into town for supplies. Dutch, his foreman, took one look at him and shook his head. "You're a damn fool, boss. She built that cabin for her husband. Her dead husband. You both going to die alone out of loyalty to ghosts? Elizabeth wouldn't want this for you. You know she wouldn't." At the counter, Mrs. Patterson, the baker, and a widow herself had overheard. "He's right, honey," she said gently. "Loving again doesn't mean loving less before. Hearts don't work that way. They expand. They don't replace." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. Permission. That's what he'd been waiting for. Permission to move on without betraying Elizabeth's memory. He looked at Dutch, at Mrs. Patterson, and saw only understanding. "I need to go back," he said suddenly. "I need to tell her." "Then go," Dutch grinned. "We'll load the wagon. You ride ahead." Caleb bought flowers from Mrs. Patterson's shop, his hands shaking. He rehearsed what he'd say the entire ride back, how he'd tell Hannah he'd been half in love with her since he first saw her refuse to quit, that watching her build that cabin had rebuilt something in him too. He crested the ridge, heart pounding, and stopped dead. The cabin was dark, locked up tight, no smoke from the chimney, no Hannah. He dismounted and ran to the door. A note was pinned there, in her careful handwriting. "Thank you for helping me build this. I'm sorry I can't stay. The cabin is yours if you want it. I've gone where I belong." Gone. She was gone. He'd waited too long, been too afraid. Now she'd left. Probably caught the stage back east. Back to Boston where William was buried. Caleb sat on her porch, head in his hands, the flowers forgotten beside him. He'd finally found the courage to reach for something, and it had slipped through his fingers. Then he heard horses. Multiple riders coming fast. It was Dutch and 3 ranch hands. "Boss," Dutch called. "We've been looking for you everywhere." "Where is she?" Caleb demanded, standing. "Did she leave on the stage?" Dutch's grin was enormous. "She's at your place." Caleb's heart stopped. "What?" "Showed up this morning with her trunk. Walked right into your kitchen like she owned it. Said she was done building walls and was ready to build a life. Said she'd wait there till you came home." Dutch's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Been 4 hours now. You might want to ride fast, boss." Caleb didn't remember the ride home. One moment he was staring at Dutch's grinning face. The next his horse was thundering up the path to his own ranch, hooves pounding out the rhythm of his racing heart. He burst through the door. Hannah stood at his stove, a wooden spoon in her hand, flour dusting her dark dress. She looked up, her eyes wide, terrified and determined all at once. Before she could speak, Caleb crossed the kitchen in 3 strides. "I built that cabin 1 log at a time," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I thought if I finished it, I'd have what William and I dreamed of, but it wasn't the cabin. It was the life. The partnership." Her voice cracked. "I was building the wrong thing. I should have been building a life, not a monument." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And I realized, I want to build that life with you." The wooden spoon clattered to the floor. Caleb's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I watched you build every day," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I fell a little more in love with your strength, your stubborn refusal to quit." His forehead touched hers. "I felt like I was betraying William, and I felt like I was betraying Elizabeth. But they loved us. They'd want us to be happy." "Are you happy?" she whispered. "I am now." Their kiss tasted of tears and flour and 2 years of grief finally breaking into light. "I don't want you to give up your cabin," Caleb said when they finally pulled apart. Hannah shook her head. "I'm not. I'm giving it a purpose." She explained her idea. A way station for women traveling west alone. A place of shelter. To help them the way you helped me. Caleb's eyes shone. Elizabeth would have loved that. "Then let's do it together," Hannah said, her hands tightening in his. "Let's build a real home. Here." "Here," he agreed, and kissed her again. 1 year later, Hannah's cabin on the ridge sheltered a young widow with 2 children, smoke rising cheerfully from its chimney. Hannah and Caleb rode up with supplies. "I don't know how to thank you," the woman said, her children peeking from behind her skirts. Hannah smiled, remembering her own desperation. "Someone did the same for me once." They rode home together through the warm afternoon. Their own ranch had grown. Flower gardens framed the porch. A children's swing hung from the old oak tree. Inside, Elizabeth's paintings still graced the walls, and William's pocket watch sat on the mantel. And between them, a new photograph. Hannah and Caleb on their wedding day, standing between the past and the future, honoring both. As the sun set, Caleb's hand rested on the gentle swell of Hannah's dress, a promise of new life. "You built your cabin one log at a time," Caleb said softly. Hannah leaned into him. "And you taught me that home isn't a place, it's who you build it with." She turned to face him, her eyes bright. "We built it." The cabin on the ridge still stood, a monument to a love that was lost. But the real home was here, built just as carefully by two hearts that learned starting over didn't mean forgetting. It meant honoring the past by building a future, together. What do you think is the bravest thing a person can do after losing everything? If you enjoyed this story of two people finding their way back to life, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of courage and redemption.